want to work more deeply, you can use Copilot Chat for that. GitHub Copilot Chat can help you with code explanations, building out full MVPs, writing tests, fixing terminal errors, and much, much more. Let's use Copilot Chat to create a graphical user interface or GUI for our rock, paper, scissors game. Click the chat icon to open up the chat panel, then enter your prompt, create a simple GUI using a library like tkinter for the game. Let's choose our model. We'll be using Claude 3.5 Sonnet today and send the request. You'll notice a few things once the suggestion is complete. We have here where it tells us that it's using the one file as reference. Then it provides us with a plan of action and the actual code block that we're going to be using. We're also provided with the code citations that we can see right here. Let's use the Apply in Editor button to update the code. Great. You'll see here that the entire file was changed. Let's accept these changes and see what we have. It looks like Copilot Chat has refactored the entire code to be a GUI-based rock, paper, scissors game that has two main methods within a class. The play method handles the core game logic, and the run method starts the event loop of the GUI window. When we run the code, we see that we can now play the game more interactively.
Welcome to Rubber Duck Thursdays. It's going to be a weekly stream where we write code, talk about stuff, and we got ducks. I also see this question, what is this about? This is about open source, our open source community showing how we code things, how we use GitHub to build things at GitHub. I purposely want it to be more guided by what you all want to hear. Anyway, you wanna do some coding?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Open Source Friday, the show where we talk to maintainers about the apps they're maintaining. Today's episode, I am so pumped for it because we're talking with Astro. We have Sarah from the Astro Docs team here to tell us all about how she maintains the amazing quality over on the Astro Docs site. We're going to jump right into it because on this stream, as you know, the more we talk, the more time goes. So welcome, Sarah. Hi.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yes. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the stream. I see the Astro community is in the chat. Hello, Astro. We love you. I love you. So let's just jump right into it, right? So Astro is a web framework that allows you to build modern sites very quickly with like very tiny bundle sizes, right? It performs well. It's very fast. It's very efficient. And I promise you, it has the best developer experience I've ever experienced of any web framework. But today, we're not going to be diving into the codes in the nooks and crannies of Astro specifically. We're going to be talking about the documentation site, which is excellent. So Sarah, tell us about yourself. What do you do at Astro? How long have you been doing it? And tell us a little bit about Astro Docs.
Well, thanks. Yes, my name is Sarah. I'm a core maintainer at Astro, and I'm also the docs lead. So yeah, I can see the number of comments increasing, and I know our community always jumps into these streams, so I'm not even going to check the comments. But hi, everybody. I know you're there. Thank you for coming. Yeah, so any open source project needs documentation. And the cool thing about Astro, so you mentioned that Astro is a web framework. It helps you build for the web. But the really cool thing, and where I think our documentation both becomes super important and also is a little bit of our success story, is that Astro lets you write the code you're familiar with, whether you're sticking to HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, or using a framework you already know, like React, Vue, or Svelte, and are just looking for a different architecture to house that. It's also optimized with built-in Markdown to give you a great experience if you're writing lots of text, because nobody wants to be, writing essays in HTML, right? That's why we've got languages
Right.
like Markdown. And so it's a pretty gentle onboarding experience, because however you learned to build for the web, you can bring that to Astro. If you came from a boot camp, something like Free Code Camp or Scrimba, Astro is a great introduction to a framework for building on top of that existing knowledge. Or if you've been using these other platforms that are only based around one framework, like Next.js for React, or SvelteKit with Svelte, you can bring that framework knowledge and just use Astro to house your code. So what made me really excited about getting involved with Astro 3.5 years now ago was that it meets you at any stage of your web dev journey. And certainly I was on a pretty weird stage in my journey, because I had just finished one of those boot camps to really learn modern web development, even though I had been coding straight HTML sites since like 95, 96.
Oh, wow.
So I was familiar with HTML, but I didn't know anything about this modern world and frameworks and how you actually write other stuff that builds to give you your HTML. And so that's what makes the Docs project super interesting and super challenging, is that we welcome everyone. We have to produce content that meets you where you are. It can't alienate anyone. It can't talk over people with less experience, and it can't talk down to people with more experience. It shouldn't come across as an introductory framework for someone who is very experienced with web dev, but it's totally accessible for beginners to pick up. So no one should be reading our docs and thinking this isn't for me, because Astro is for everyone. So that's where documentation, it can be a huge, huge challenge, because any bit of writing you do, if you're writing a letter, if you're writing something to a newspaper, it depends on your audience, right? The first rule of writing is, well, who's your audience? Who are you writing for? Well, we're writing for everybody. And that is something that's a challenge that documentation has, especially when you run the risk of making people think you are not writing for them, and therefore that this thing you are writing about is not for them.
So tell me, I kind of want to zero in on that, Sarah. Sorry about that. I kind of want to zero in on that. I kind of want to zero in on Astro being the web framework that can be used with multiple other, like technologies. So like you can use Preact, Solid.js, Vue, Svelte, React, of course. And then it also works with multiple CSS libraries. Not just basic CSS. You can use Tailwind and like other technologies that you want to use, and then you can deploy it anywhere you want. I think that's what I love about Astro. You can choose to write your site using Markdown with MDX, or you can choose to build out your components and then add them into the Markdown files to serve it on the web. I really love the architecture and the structure of Astro. But let's zero in on the documentation, specifically when you said, you're writing for everyone. That's difficult, right? Because a beginner audience using Astro is so different from a beginner person who is not only new to Astro but new to coding is different from somebody who's new to Astro but has been coding for years. So how do you balance, the documentation for such a broad audience?
And that's exactly, you hit the nail on the head. Usually I have to point that out to people, that we can't just say beginner, right? You might be new to Astro, but you are a super experienced web dev. You're a super experienced backend dev. right?
Mhm.
You could be entirely new to web dev, but Astro's the first Astro's the first framework you super got involved with. And so you find yourself in this weird position where you know lots about Astro, but not much outside the Astro boundaries. So that's why it's important not to sort of label people in any particular way, because it's all about what do you know and what don't you know, and you're coming to our docs because you need to know it. And this is something that it's always a challenge for anything you're writing. So there are some, there are some good practices in writing about if you're going to use an acronym, then you spell it out, right? Most of us are very familiar with CMS. I would bet there are some people who might not even know or remember that CMS stands for Content Management System, right? So it's a balance, and that, because Astro is open source and Astro Docs is open source, that leads into the perfect segue to mention that I think Astro Docs is as successful as it is because everybody's contributing. Because we can't know who you are in advance, but an open source documentation projects allows you to tell us who you are and how that documentation worked for you and whether or not it resonated. And so, well, we don't get very much right on the first try, I'm sure. A website can be changed. Nothing's final. We make content and we put it out there. And sometimes we put it out there early and we let you contribute back and we let you tell us whether we hit the mark.
Yeah, I love that because it seems like there's truly a strategy and an understanding of what a broad technical audience truly needs. And I feel like Astro, the documentation really captures that, right? I can see the intentionality behind it. Let me pop into the chat to answer a few questions. So one question I'm seeing that pops out at me is it Astro to develop web pages or to produce documentation? I would argue both, but Sarah can correct me. So Astro itself is a web framework that helps you to build websites. But there's also Astro Docs that has something called, I believe, Starlight that helps you to write your own documentation. But we're going to get into Starlight a little bit later, but I just wanted to differentiate between Astro and Astro Docs. And today we're talking to Sarah, who is the lead maintainer of the Astro Docs site.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in there, what's actually really cool is Astro Docs is an Astro website. So, right, Astro's for building websites. Sometimes your websites are documentation sites. Documentation can take a lot of forms. Some projects document only in code comments. Some use READMEs. Because Astro is about building websites, we just build an entire site for our documentation.
That's true.
So if you go to Astro, you will get a tiny bit of information, but not a lot on a README. You might be used to going to an open source project and saying, okay, I'll look at its README. Or maybe it has a special docs folder with some markdown files. No, we got a whole Astro website going on. And yes, as you mentioned, Starlight is our documentation theme, but you can build any kind of website, web applications. If you're building for the web, that's what Astro is going to help you do. We just happen today to be talking about a very specific Astro website, which is my baby, our baby, the Astro Docs.
I love it. So let's kind of go back to the beginning of the creation of Astro documentation. What did that kind of look like, and how did you plan it out? I'm gonna bring up your screen share here just so we have something visual on the screen. But like, what was the genesis of Astro Docs like?
So when I joined the project, Astro did actually have existing documentation very early. I joined the project before version 1. So Astro's at about we just released version 5 in December. So I joined the project very early on. It wasn't yet a V1 release, but they already had a documentation site in part because if you're building something that lets you build websites, a doc site is one great example to test things out, to see, well, how does this work? If you have a site that has very specific needs. So as you can see on the screen there, a documentation site, navigation is going to be super important. If you're putting up your personal portfolio and showing off some of your projects, you're not going to need categories and sections and nested documentation explaining different APIs. But if you're doing a documentation site, you will need some particular structure. So this site has developed over generations of Astro. And when I took it over, we had docs. I want to say maybe we had 30 pages of docs. Someone in chat will tell me how many hundreds of Astro Docs pages we have now. And so developing the documentation over time involves, as you said, there's two main components for a documentation site, leaving out the fact it's an Astro site, it's a website at all. So you got CSS, right? You had accessibility needs you have to check for. But from a writing standpoint, you have content that has to be clear and correct. And then you need some kind of navigation and discoverability system. People have to be able to find your clear and correct content. So that's where someone like me, a dedicated docs lead, comes in. Astro Docs is open source. We have, I was going to go check our GitHub repo page to see how many contributors we have at this exact moment. I know it's over 1,100 because I checked yesterday. So everyone is contributing, but there needs to be an overall structure. There needs to be a vision. There needs to be someone guiding the ship. And that's what I've been doing for 3 years now. In that position, trying to wrangle everyone's efforts together and put them into something cohesive.
Absolutely. So tell me two things. I'm curious. And then I'll go to some more questions. I've started a few. The first question I have is how do you wrangle over 1,000 contributors to Astro Docs? And the second thing is, tell us more about the tools and technology behind the website.
Okay, so we'll start with the how. And I think personally for our Astro Docs situation, I am not some uninvolved, overseer. I am in the trenches with everyone. I am very, very involved. And at my past career, so I was a high school teacher and tutor, specifically. So I had an entire career of working with students who were having trouble with math, who were afraid of math, right? Where it was difficult. And it can be uncomfortable to not be great at something, but to try to sort of put yourself out there. To learn is challenging. To admit that you don't have anything yet is challenging. And I mean, that's what my career was. My career was sitting down with, teenagers, trying to get them comfortable about math, trying to show them gently how they could improve, how things work, and then how they can totally do it too, right? Breaking down things into steps and encourage it. I always say 90% of math tutoring was just making the students feel comfortable enough to try a problem, to take that next step. And that's the energy that I've always brought to Astro Docs, is I know I can't do it without these 1,000 other people. So I got to get them on my side. I have to have them feeling comfortable and confident to contribute, knowing that, sure, I have a background in writing and a degree in English, and I'm going to polish their words, but that doesn't mean that you're not a valuable contributor to this project, to check the accuracy of a code example that someone has submitted, right? You can deploy Astro to Netlify, Cloudflare, like all these different places. So we have guides for how to put your website up on the web in like 30 different places. I have not put a website up on the web in 30 different places, but collectively we have. So I need your experience to come into our docs and to help craft them, help shape them, and then it's my job to figure out where that content goes. But it really is about making people realize what they already have, what they are capable of doing, and what they have to bring to the party and what they can contribute, and showing them specifically how they can contribute. I would say that's the how. I would say that's, if you hang around Astrodocs, and we got lots of Astrodocs team people in the chat there, they can confirm, this is generally my MO. This, more than anything, more important than the docs I write, are the docs I can get you to write. And then I just edit them and
I love
put them
that.
together nicely.
I love that because, you know, oftentimes with open source projects, there is a overemphasis on the code contributions, but the documentation contributions is equally as important because it allows your project to be more accessible to your users and to your new users that's coming in, right? So I love that.
Yeah, if I can, before I jump to the how, I mean, that is like, that's not a throwaway comment. That's the basis. That's the foundation of Astrodocs. That an open source project is more than its code. Because if we didn't have a marketing website, or we didn't have people coming on these streams, no one would know about Astro. If we didn't have docs, no one would know how to use Astro. If we didn't have support, people volunteering their time and hanging out on forums and in the Discord, then you'd get stuck when your project doesn't work like the docs say it does, and you'd leave. And if we didn't have a community, then what are we even doing? Like, why are we building anything if not for people to use it? So, I mean, it's a lot of people talk about code contributions versus non-code contributions. And some people, you know, get their backs up or are a little annoyed with that categorization, like that code is this one special thing and everything else is relegated. So I don't know if you noticed when I posted on Mastodon and Blue Sky yesterday, and I was telling people we were going to be having this chat, I didn't use the phrase non-code contributions. I used the phrase beyond code contributions.
Yeah.
Just to test it out. And, you know, because why is that the dividing line? When for an open source project to work, there is so much more that needs to happen.
True.
And that is valuable.
It's true. Hear. Sorry,
I sidetracked there, but that's like near and dear to my heart.
Yes. So you heard it here, folks. Open source projects, it's more than code, right? That is one very important aspect of the project. But your documentation, your process for managing your contributors, your process for, you know, onboarding, that's all a part of the documentation that your open source project needs. Sometimes I'll go to some projects, even if they're smaller, they'll have like, let's say like 300 stars, but I have no idea how to use the project because the documentation is just a blob of code. Here's an output to expect. Here's an output to expect. Here's the thing to start it. But I'm just like, okay, what is this project? What does it do? And how does it benefit me? Why should I use it? And I leave the project and I never go back to it, right? Because it's not telling me anything. So knowing how to talk about your code, how to talk about your project is very important. And I have a question here from not Michaela. Sorry if I'm butchering your name, but she's asking, or they're asking, are there any enterprises that use Astro for their documentation? And then I saw someone responded by saying Cloudflare developer docs are built with Astro, and some of Netlify documentation is also built with Astro. So yes, it's definitely a scalable approach.
Yep, absolutely. And we're working on a case study about Cloudflare's use right now. And Cloudflare gave a talk last year, I think, about converting their docs to Astro.
Nice. I love that. I love that. So let's get into the tech and the tools behind Astro. How are you building this? Like with Astro, are you using any additional frameworks? And what other tools and tech are you using to manage the entire thing?
So yeah, the great thing about building a documentation site for Astro Docs is that we get to build an Astro site. So all the people who contribute to Astro Docs are actually contributing to an Astro repo, not the repo of the code itself necessarily,
Mm.
but Astro Docs has its own separate repo on GitHub. You can go star it. Sometimes we have more contributors than the Astro project itself code. So yeah, you can find the repo on GitHub. And so there's a phrase we use called docs as code. So if
Mm.
you're writing content, we talked earlier about how, Markdown is a nice way to write text instead of needing to put it in HTML. If you're used to a WordPress site, you might have this little on-screen little editor where you're typing your text in. Everyone who's contributing to Astro Docs is contributing to a live, huge Astro project. It's an Astro website. So everyone contributing and helping making the docs better is also helping us test Astro by contributing to an Astro website.
Okay.
So this is what docs as code means is in some cases, it means your documentation lives directly inside the same repo as your project. And in fact, some of our documentation does. If you use Astro in your code editor and sometimes you're typing and you get autocomplete or you hover and you see options, this is docs that we have written in with the Astro code so that these other tools can use it while you're coding. So sometimes docs as code means putting all of your docs right in there because they give you extra developer tools and niceties. Things like our error messages are actually located with the code itself so that Astro can use the messages, but that also we actually use GitHub Actions to check to see, are there any updates to our configuration docs or our error messages in the main site? So we use GitHub Actions to then automatically send us a PR when our docs site needs to update our own content with some documentation that the devs have written to go along with the code base itself. So when you're working with Astro, we're we're proud of our error messages.
Yeah.
We have a whole guide to writing error messages. Erica, one of our core maintainers, wrote the entire guide. Like, this is what it is. Here's how to write a title. Here's how to write a description. If you're going to add a hint, this is what the hint should say. Things like that. So we have a whole guide on writing error messages because when you're using Astro, you're probably going to hit an error at some point, and then it's going to show up on your screen. But you may also want to consult the documentation on an error that someone got. Maybe you're helping someone with an error, so you don't have that error in front of you. It should also be in our docs. So we use GitHub Actions to pull code in. And other than those cases, most of our code is written in the docs repo itself, which is an Astro site that also takes advantage of our special documentation theme. We've mentioned it before, called Starlight. And what Starlight is 1-2 years old now. So it's not as old as Astro Docs. We started with Astro Docs. We built an Astro website. We said, okay, documentation site needs table of contents. A documentation site, you need to be able to go previous, next, all this stuff. It needs to organize your content. You need to have sections. You need headings. And then we added so much to this site that we just made it a theme. We made it a template that anyone can just, instead of start a new Astro site, you can just jump right to start a new Starlight site. because we were getting so many compliments on the things we did in our documentation, how our code
Right.
samples looked. We haven't even talked about our translators yet. Astro Docs is in 14 languages, and it's community translators who are constantly updating every time a page changes. They jump in and they update the docs. Well, we have an elaborate system for them to check to know which pages need updating. So if you're like, I got some time, is there a page I can translate? What's out of date? We have an entire system for how they can contribute with their translations. So we just got so super fancy with this doc site. We thought, we were asked, oh, so if I just build a standard Astro template, because we did have an older docs template. Oh, so if I use that template, I'm gonna get docs like Astro Docs. And we're like, well, no, we did an awful lot to this site. So we just took everything we knew about writing good docs and making good choices. And we built that into a reusable template. So I'm pretty sure Chris is probably on the stream. Heidio's probably here. They are two of our core maintainers who update Starlight. It is an amazingly mature option for just putting your content in and having a fantastic, accessible, lightweight doc site so people can read about your project and they don't show up and see there's no README and walk away.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm curious about the translation. So oftentimes I don't see that with most open source projects. So that's being managed by just community contribution.
Yes, all of our translations are community contributed. I would like to say that we had this grand plan and devised some kind of system for people to contribute. We had to fend people off. We had to build systems because so many people wanted to contribute and volunteer their time that all of a sudden this is part of the 1,000 people that we have to wrangle. And so we started to develop tools so that they could do that. And what's super cool, there's one thing, there are so many super cool things, but two super cool things or two directions I could go with that sentence. The first thing is that so many of these things we built for our docs, like this system to manage our translations, they have spun out to become their own open source projects. So Lunaria is an open source project, and that's what AstroDocs I18N tracking system became. Same with our code samples. We have the fanciest code samples of any docs, and that spun out into its own open source project as well. But specifically with respect to our translators, they contribute so much to our docs. Again, it goes back to what we said at the beginning. Nobody should read our docs and feel like this isn't for you, right? Our docs have to meet you where you are. And if where you are is speaking another language and the English is a struggle for you, then we're happy to provide the docs in these other languages. And what's even more exciting is when we then created the Starlight template, our translators, the people who were translating the documentation of Astro, jumped in to translate Starlight's UI. So it's basic text like first or last or on this page or search. So when you start a new Starlight site, all you have to do is say which languages you would like to write documentation in, and boom, when you do the language picker, I think we're over 30 languages right now with Starlight. When you do the language picker, your site appears in that language. All you have to do is say which languages you want to use. You have to bring your own content and you have to translate your own content, but that's something that our community can do for you. So we are just really happy with what Astro Docs, everything we did and everything we poured into it. We now put it into Starlight. so that everybody else can have that experience.
I love that. I mean, like Astro and AstroDoc specifically is truly a yeah, Cassidy just said it, like the power of open source. It's such a great example of how community can help you shine and go even further when the community is properly nurtured and properly managed. I think you're doing a phenomenal job as the lead documentarian queen of Astro. And I salute you because this is a really huge thing. I mean, it's stellar. And I'm curious, what are you using for these beautiful code samples on AstroDocs?
Oh, right. I mentioned Lunaria by name,
Oh,
but maybe Hippo's
Lunaria.
yeah, maybe Lunaria's our I18N tracker. So that's one thing that came out of AstroDocs. I didn't mention expressive code specifically, which is built into Starlight.
Oh,
so that's one of our maintainers, Hippo. He built that originally in AstroDocs, and I had a waiting list. I had people asking to be on the waiting list for when they could use expressive code, because of course it started as an AstroDocs thing. One of our maintainers is like, I can make those code samples better. And sure enough, he could. And people kept asking, when can I get that? When can I get that? And I said, well, I think he's spinning it out into a package. But yes, expressive code. You can add it to any Astro site super easily, and it's built into Starlight. So if you're documenting your code stuff, it's already there.
I will say. So how I got into Astro, it was just this year. So Cassidy, my manager, she did a lunch and learn at work to talk about Astro and to show it off. And I was like, whoa, that's it? And I immediately switched my blog from WordPress to Astro in like 3 days. And yes, I did use expressive code to sort of manage the code samples and how they appear on the site. And it's beautiful. It's phenomenal. And it was so seamless to use and to integrate with Astro. I mean, the Astro community is powerful, and I would love to have some Astro engineers or, some of the core maintainers of Astro itself to come onto our stream to show us the beauty of Astro, or maybe we can, do it ourselves as the GitHub open source team. But it's phenomenal. And expressive code, that's what you're using. The expressive code package is amazing, y'all. If you want to start a blog or improve your blog and get up and running, Astro is definitely the way to go because they have so many themes and they're well documented. That's the thing. The documentation is just chef's kiss. And I have like 6 questions here that I need to ask you. So let me just pop in there because I can just hype up about Astro all day long. So the first question I have for you, Sarah, is Astro supports TypeScript. Will it support TypeScript Go later? I'm not sure do you know this answer?
It's not in our plans. So I can tell you I'm not the person to answer this, but this isn't something that's necessarily in our plans. But
Great.
It's an open source project. The roadmap repo is where you can pop suggestions. If you're in our Discord, we have a feedback ideas channel, so you can always ask things like that there.
Yeah. And another question is, so is Astro for static web pages or dynamic sites as well?
Dynamic sites as well. Astro started, so I mentioned I joined it before V1, and it's now V5. When I joined in V1, I probably would have identified itself as a static site generator, similar to Gatsby or Hugo or Eleventy. One of the things that we say about Astro is Astro lets you opt in to complexity. So I see posts all the time of people saying, yeah, I upgraded from Astro 1 to Astro 4 and nothing broke. And that's because you can still have that simple static website. If you just need a portfolio or maybe even a blog, then there's not stuff you need. But Astro does progressively add features to take you a little past that. So one of our newer features is server islands. So maybe everybody on your site is seeing the same content, right? You're showing everybody the same site. Could be a totally static site, but you want them to see a little personalized avatar when they're logged in. So we have some features where you can add a little bit of complexity and have a little script run when they first load the page to add things like that in. But no, Astro's not really limited. But yeah, we focus on content because that's what a website is at its core, and that's our roots. And we want to make sure we never make any choices so that somebody back on Astro 1, that their site is broken when it was a simple static site.
Yeah. And I mean, even a comment here, and I believe this is one of your maintainers, that Astro is not just for the web. You have people building native web interfaces using Astro and Tari. Never heard
you hop in the Discord and you get in a conversation with Fryuni if you want to talk about making Astro doing things it was never intended to do, but yet can do. Absolutely.
Nice.
That's why I say it's not really limited.
But
sometimes you have a hard time breaking out of a past reputation, or people don't realize what has happened from version 2, version 3, version 4. So check it out.
I mean, I'm definitely like, I got the ting of my arms are like, Astro and Tari to build native interfaces. That really piqued my spidey senses because that sounds amazing. So is there a React or Vue.js version that Astro supports?
Somebody's asking Fryuni. So I don't know if that's related to something more intense than web. In general, when you build with Astro, you can bring, Vue components, React components, solid components, Svelte components, and you can put them inside your HTML. We have this thing called Islands architecture. So you can build with different frameworks based on what you know, what you like. We usually have this, everyone but me, I'm the only one that refuses to say this. Everyone says, oh, you could put all the different components on one page. You can have a React counter and a Svelte counter and a Vue counter, but we don't recommend you do it. And I recommend you do the heck out of it, because if we're talking about collaboration, maybe you have this React date picker that you just can't live without, right? Then put it on your site. Maybe you want to do the rest of your site with some cool Vue components. Put them together.
Yes.
Maybe someone wants to add something awesome to your site, but they only know Svelte. Let them add a Svelte component. Or maybe you've never tried Svelte and you're like, I wonder what that's like. Do you have to spin up a whole new project? No, just put a test page on your site, build a Svelte component, see if you like it. If you don't, get rid of the page. And it's a fabulous learning and collaborative environment.
I agree.
I say do what you want.
Use all the frameworks at the same time.
JS Fusion, that's
use
the
them all. I love it. I love it because the JavaScript community loves to fight about their frameworks. And for me, I'm just like, use the one you like. Leave the other ones, or use them all, for your specific use case. This was amazing, Sarah. Great job with the Astro docs, and thanks so much for coming on. Does anyone else have any questions? I think I'm all out of questions, but I highlighted a bunch of my questions that I have, but this was a really, really insightful chat on Astro docs and how the team manages it, and the intentionality is what gets me. The intentionality behind how things are done at Astro and Astro Docs, and how you give back to the community. It's so amazing, and it's definitely high praises from people in the chat, people in the team. So we'd love to have Core Astro come on. I'm putting that out again since I know there are a few Astro folks in the chat.
I'm sure we can get you someone.
But if you want to contribute to Astro, be sure to check out the repository. Here's the link again on the screen. go to github.com/withastro/docs to get started. Tons of issues are open if you want to dig in. If you don't see your language, right, Sarah? If you don't see your language in the translation list and you would love for your language to be there, be the volunteer. If you see a problem, it's your responsibility to fix it. So I saw someone mention Urdu, and yeah, if you don't see Urdu on the list, pop your name in to be one of the contributors to get Astro in Urdu. But otherwise, I don't have anything else. Anything else you want to say to the good folks, Sarah?
So I guess the final thing I say is some of you on the stream might know me because I replied to one of your social media posts saying, hey, I wrote a blog post, or hey, I built this thing. So I'm not trying to be creepy when I reply to you if I don't know you and say, our community would love to see that. Please come post it in the Discord showcase. Or, maybe there are lots of pages in Docs where we have sections for community resources and we put people's blogs there. So I say, hey, would you like to make a PR to Docs and add your blog post there as another community resource so people can find it? So I'm just saying, not trying to be creepy, but I will be in your mentions.
Yes, and that's actually how Sarah and I met on Blue Sky. She saw my is it a sky? She saw my post about migrating from WordPress to Astro, and she said, hey, pop it on our site. And I said, hey, it's done, and come on our stream. And here we are. But thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. This has been amazing. I am more of an Astro hype girl than ever before. It's truly the thing I grab for whenever I'm trying to just build something really quickly, because the experience is just excellent. So see y'all next week for another great chat on Open Source Friday. And until then, happy Friday.
Thanks, everyone.